following program is suitable for all ages.
Buffone. A certain magic will always linger with the very name. It speaks of courage and fervor in the world's most brutal game. 55, worn by Doug Buffone, a Chicago Bear through and through. He demanded excellence of himself and anyone wearing navy blue.
You tell me what's going on. This is moronic. We're going to get our whipped all the way down the line. I want somebody to get kicked in the and get out there and play. You're getting paid to play this game. And play it right. I don't mind you getting beat. I got my whipped many times. But I tell you, I took somebody down with me. You are a professional team. Act like one, for God's sakes.
Football fans, this is Buffone 55, the John Buffone Show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Buffone 55, a fast-paced podcast analyzing the monsters of the Midway. Welcome, Barflies, Bear fans, and even maybe some Packers fans out there. I am your host, John Buffone. We're coming live to you on Tuesday, September 3rd, 2 nights before the Bears and Packers kick off the 100th season of the NFL. Andy Herman of the Pack-A-Day podcast will join me briefly, but first, I want to extend my best wishes to Alyssa Barbieri, who lives down in Florida, and she's unable to be with us this week because she's dealing with the effects of Hurricane Dorian. Hope you're doing well, Alyssa. The Barflies are behind you. Sitting in the moderator chair tonight is the old man himself, Aldo Gandia, who's assured me he still knows how this show works and he's not going to fall asleep at the wheel. Aldo, you there?
I'm not sure I assured you about the falling asleep part.
Maybe I made that up. Maybe that's take the hint.
How can I forget how this show works? But before I tell everybody how it works, I want to echo your sentiments towards Alyssa. I hope she's able to listen in somehow, even if it's on the podcast afterwards. We miss you. Hope you're safe, you and your family, which I got to meet her dad when they were down here for Bourbonnais, so hoping that they are well. All right, regarding the show, we begin and end the show always with 5 questions that John has 55 seconds to respond to. That's John's way of dedicating Buffone 55 to Doug Buffone, his uncle, who played 15 seasons for the Chicago Bears and wore number 55. Did I get it right, John?
You killed it. You can still do it, you old battle axe.
All right. Let's get the 5 in the books, and then we will bring in Andy Herman, okay?
Let's do it.
All right. Number 1, we need you to take on the 53-man roster. It's set, and I'm wondering first of all, what the main area of concern is for you regarding the roster. You got 55 seconds.
You know, I kind of waffled back and forth on this for a while because the depth at outside linebacker and tackle are kind of concerning, and you're kind of praying to God that injuries don't occur, which is usually an unanswered prayer in the game of football. But as a whole, I'm legitimately concerned about the tight ends. Trey Burton has this groin thing going on. We're not sure if he's going to play or not, or if it's going to be a lingering issue. Then you have Adam Shaheen, who was supposed to be the guy, but also has trouble staying on the field. And behind them are Broniker and former offensive lineman Bradley Soule. So your top 2 guys at the position are underwhelming and injury risk. The depth isn't very promising, and you wonder if Matt Nagy will start scheming up game plans to basically hide or mask the tight end position. Can he utilize the versatility of Tariq Cohen and Cordell Patterson enough that you can still produce points without really having to rely on the tight ends for anything? Because if Burton doesn't play, are you okay with Adam Shaheen being the main guy? And is that workload going to set him up for another flare on his ankle or back or whatever? And then you got Broniker as your number 1. I mean, this could be a little sticky moving forward.
I hear you on that. And, you know, Broniker is that U-back, which is the position that Trey Burton plays. So I'm anticipating that Broniker is going to be the guy who's going to handle those Trey Burton type plays. And I like Ben Broniker, but he really hasn't proven that he can do that job at the level, anywhere near the level of Trey Burton. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
It's a little concerning.
Yes. Now, on the other hand, what position area are you most impressed with? You've got 55 seconds.
Oh, I love the running backs this team has brought together, man. I think David Montgomery has a chance to have a Matt Forte-like impact, a guy who consistently rushes for over 1,000 yards and catches 50 to 60 balls, except in 2014 when Forte caught 102 passes, but I digress on that. Then you have one of the most explosive, exciting, versatile backs in the game with Tariq Cohen, who can be on the field at the same time as Montgomery and can basically do it all. And also, I think having Mike Davis is huge because he's a guy that can just get the job done. We're not going to have any more Mizell moments. We're not going to have any more Benny Cunningham moments. He averaged 4.6 yards a carry with Seattle last year and caught 34 balls. He's a very solid back, and having him just for depth is a real luxury. And then you have a guy like Kareth White with blazing speed, kind of a home run hitter kind of guy. And obviously, I think he's going to play into the special teams game as well. And by the way, they were able to stash Ryan Nall on the practice squad, a guy that everyone seems to like. This is about as solid as it gets when it comes to the running back position.
Oh, you ain't kidding. And I love the wide receiver position. The general manager of this team has done a great job of getting Mr. Trubisky some weapons. Speaking of weapons, I almost used one when Cody Parkey missed that field goal in the playoffs, but that's a different story. Eddie Pinheiro is now the Bears kicker, and on Sunday, Coach Nagy talked about the pressure of being the Bears kicker in 2019. In fact, this is what he said.
We want to think of the glass half full. He's going to come out here and make every kick. And then if he does miss a kick or does miss an extra point, for instance, last year when we had those missed field goals, there were several of them in the game. I think it was the Detroit game. At some point as a coach, you have to, from what we went through, you have to decide, okay, is it time to go for two or is it time to go for it on fourth down? That's a juggling act that we're going to, until he proves himself in real live bullets, we won't know that. And I'm just hoping that he's that guy that comes out and has a great year.
Yes, I'm hoping. I'm hoping too. But I want to get your evaluation on how the Bears conducted the entire search for a kicker this year, and do you think that the process that the Bears used has added more pressure to the kicker? Your thoughts begin any second, and I'll start the clock.
Well, you can't say it wasn't thorough. It was obvious that this was going to be a huge priority as soon as Parkey double doinked last year. And I think the coaching staff, the front office, the players, and certainly the fan base believe that if the Bears win that game against the Eagles, they have a very legitimate shot at going to the Super Bowl. So they held this competition and put guys through the ringer. They didn't bring in a whole lot of notable names. I mean, Chris Blewett, and unless you're a Pitt Panthers fan, you probably have no idea who the hell that guy is. Elliott Fry did all right, and he's probably going to latch onto a team at some point, maybe the Bears if Pinheiro struggles. But this was going to be a high-pressure position no matter who the Bears found or how they went about getting it. Every Bears fan is going to be holding their breath during every kick. Every miss is going to ignite past frustration and anger, and every move Pinheiro makes will be in the spotlight. Unfair, but true. This was going to happen regardless of how they found their new kicker or who they signed or, how they went about doing this competition. Until there is proven consistency at this position, that's how it's going to be. This is just going to be part of the job.
Yep, I'm with you there. And it'll be interesting to get maybe Andy's thoughts on the kicking battle that happened in their camp with Sam Ficken and Matt Crosby, because they were potentially flirting with the idea of replacing the veteran up there. So maybe we can talk about that with Andy. All right, question number 4. 10 players named to the practice squad. They are quarterback Tyler Bray. You mentioned running back Ryan Nall, receiver Thomas Ives, tight end Jesper Horsted, offensive linemen Alex Bars and Sam Mustipher, both from Notre Dame, defensive lineman Jonathan Harris, outside linebacker James Vaughters, and cornerbacks, or should say defensive backs, Stephen Denmark and Michael Joseph. Any names there ring out to you as guys that you think have the skills to develop into a contributor to the Chicago Bears in the future? Your 55 seconds begins now.
Well, like I said, I think Ryan Nall has become a guy that Bears fans really root for and like. Does that mean he's ever going to crack the 53-man roster and actually contribute? I don't know. I thought Bars and Vaughters had legit shots to make the roster, and although I wish them the best in their careers, I'm pretty happy that no one claimed them so they could stay in the Bears system and keep developing. Vaughters had 3 sacks and 2 forced fumbles in the preseason. Honestly, I can see him getting called up at some point, whether it's because of injury or any other reason. I think he'll be on the sidelines at some point this year. He's 26, bounced around the CFL. And if he has some consistency in coaching and stays in the same system, maybe he turns into something valuable. The same could be said for Bars. Impressive preseason tackle, could be called up for, injury sometime this year. Only 23 years old. Maybe with a full year of being around NFL players and NFL coaches, he could be a good find. Now, I'll end with Jesper Horsted, just because he's been getting a lot of social media love. I know people like to talk about Jesper, and he has an interesting story. Ivy League guy. I think that could be a long road, but the tight end position's kind of a wild card right now.
Yes, it really is. And I'll tell you one thing about Jesper. We had him on one of the shows here at the network. Great guy, smart, of course. He went to Princeton. But the one thing that's obvious about him is that while he has extraordinary pass catching skills, he was a wide receiver at Princeton, he still needs to work on his tight end blocking. And so once he masters that, I kind of got a feeling that he could be around for a long time with the Bears. Hopefully he masters that blocking. All right, final question before we bring Andy in. Nagy is proving himself to be one of the most innovative head coaches in the NFL. Now, there's a chance that his approach to sitting the players throughout the entire preseason could spread throughout the league and maybe even alter the number of preseason games needed. Your uncle played in 2-a-day practices at Rensselaer, Indiana. I remember reading about this in the Chicago Sun-Times and Daily News and Tribune. Under the hot sun, they were out there 2-a-days in hot Rensselaer, Indiana, and then they would play 6 preseason games. Now, I'm not sure if Doug played in all 6 preseason games, but that's how many the Bears had. Now, what do you make of Nagy's approach to the preseason? 55 seconds starts now.
I kind of got into this last week. I remember hearing my uncle talking about training camps back in the 60s and 70s. First of all, they sounded brutal and kind of unsafe. But a lot of those camps were to get guys in playing shape because they were working at their other jobs during the offseason, whether it was, owning a car dealership or whatever else. The offseason was truly an off-season for some guys, and then you got into shape once training camp rolled around. The preseason is too long and kind of unnecessary now. By the 4th game, the staffs basically know who's making the team. I said this last week. When the new CBA is negotiated, I'm predicting that the preseason schedule is going to probably be cut in half. Now, to recoup that, there's going to be a shakeup in either regular season games or the playoff system. Like it or not, it's probably coming. So it's either going to be an extra game or extra playoff teams. If they do that 18-game schedule with a 16-game playing limit, it'll be met with such vitriol, myself included, that's just asinine. So maybe a 17-game schedule is on the horizon. Maybe 2 bye weeks could be an option if you really want the 18-game season. They're going to have to figure out the pay scale as well. But there are going to be changes made, I think.
All right.
And with that being said, we're going to jump right into our guest tonight. I welcome Andy Herman, the owner and co-host of the Pack-A-Day podcast. He's also a writer at Cheesehead TV and a weekly guest on ESPN's The Sport Lead in parts of Wisconsin. Andy, thanks for being on. How you doing tonight?
Hey, guys, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Bears, Packers, it's one of the best rivalries in sports, if not the best rivalry in sports. I kind of want to jump right into this. Lots of changes in Green Bay during the offseason. In fact, the biggest change probably be when Mike McCarthy was let go, and they bring in Matt LaFleur. Can you tell us a little bit about who Matt LaFleur is, his philosophies, and his basic qualifications that got him into this position?
Yeah, it was a really interesting process going through all the different, head coaches and coordinators that they brought in. It was either 10 or 12 different candidates that they brought in throughout the entire process. Guys like Josh McDaniels that really kind of headlined the list. But Matt LaFleur obviously was the one that they hired. Comes from the Mike Shanahan system and Kyle Shanahan system. Also had a little bit of time with Sean McVay. So he kind of comes from both of those schools of thought. The interesting thing about him is that he never had a head coaching job at any level. So this is his very first head coaching job. Definitely going to be the guy that's overseeing the offense. Mike Pettin's really going to be in charge of the defense, although, of course, he's the head coach. So everything is going to kind of run through him. Tore his Achilles early in mini camp, so he's kind of been walking around in a walking boot, had to get around in a cart a little bit through mini camps and OTAs, so he's had a little bit of adversity on his own. I mean, thankfully for the Packers, the biggest injury so far this offseason has been to the head coach, so I think overall we'll take that. But yeah, it's been a really interesting offseason. I've absolutely loved almost everything that I've seen from Matt LaFleur. it means almost nothing until we get to games to see how he performs in games, to see if they start winning games, and really most importantly, to see how he does with adversity. This is always the honeymoon period. It's really easy to be a fan of a head coach when you're at this point. But as soon as he gets punched in the mouth a little bit and they start losing some games and there's a little bit more controversy, how does he respond to some of that? I think is what's really going to be, key for him and worth keeping an eye on. But he's handled everything incredibly well. I think one of the huge questions that continues to get brought up is the autonomy that Aaron Rodgers will have at the line of scrimmage and how much power he has. It continues to get brought up. It got brought up again today, and today he finally got a little bit frustrated with it, and he still handled it really well. But it's really been a non-issue. They've been working together from day one. Every indication would be that they're working together phenomenally. And like I said, overall, it's been a really impressive performance by him. The last thing I'll say is that the thing that I was worried about most was, say what you will about Mike McCarthy. He was incredibly detail-oriented. His practices always had a purpose. He had a new message every single offseason. And there was a lot of organization that he put in to everything that he did. And when you go from that, a tenured head coach who's won a Super Bowl to a head coach who's never had any experience, I was really worried that maybe he wasn't going to be up to the task. And man, it's been so efficient and so fun to watch. I couldn't be more impressed with him so far.
You talked a little bit about that, the controversy with LaFleur talking to the media about, whether or not Rodgers can call audibles at the line and going back and forth. Do you feel like this is basically kind of what you said, a non-issue moving forward? This is kind of a time filler narrative before the actual games start, and this is kind of something to talk about? Or is this something that could be continued to be brought up throughout the season?
Yeah, I think it's a total non-issue, but I also understand why it was a question. I mean, you have a head coach and a quarterback, the highest paid player in the league, basically, that are very similar in age. And the rumors, true or not, and I don't know that we still have a full understanding of the entire story, was that, Aaron Rodgers would kind of go rogue a little bit with Mike McCarthy. And I think the logical jump to conclusion that would come next is, all right, if he's doing this with a tenured head coach, is it going to happen again with Matt LaFleur? I think the original story with McCarthy has been blown out of proportion a little bit, although I don't think, again, any of us really have a great understanding of exactly what happened there. It's all based on different reports, and there's two sides to it, clearly, that have come out on both sides. And I definitely think that, the question is going to be is if it's a 2-minute scenario and, Matt LaFleur wants something called and run a certain way, and Aaron Rodgers really doesn't want it called that way, maybe he goes along with it and it doesn't work. I mean, I think those are the things that you need to kind of maybe keep an eye on going forward. But everything that we have seen so far would indicate that they are getting along great. And this is why I kind of put the caveat on it earlier, that until the adversity comes, until Green Bay loses a couple games, maybe gets punched in the mouth a game, maybe loses a close game, that's when we're really going to see how Matt LaFleur is able to handle and right the ship and deal with adversity. But everything I've seen so far has really been great, and I think they've got along really great together.
Bears fans love to talk about, what goes on in the trenches, with both on the offensive and defensive line. Can you take us through both lines for Green Bay, what to expect? Because they're getting some high billing in the preseason. What are your expectations for the offensive and defensive line, starting with the offensive line?
Yeah, and I'll start even by talking a little bit about the Bears against the Packers offensive line last year. If you go back in the first quarter of the Bears game, the only period of time last year where Rodgers was 100% healthy, Justin McCray was starting at right guard in that game and was an absolute revolving door. And I love Justin McCray. He put in a ton of great work in Green Bay, but he had about 3 or 4 plays where he just got blown up and didn't help the cause of the offense in any way, shape, or form. Right guard would go on to be a massive struggle throughout the entirety of the year. Byron Bell and Justin McCray were 2 of my lowest graded players. I go back and grade every player on every play, similar to kind of Pro Football Focus style. And both of them were 2 of my lowest graded players at right guard last year. Now they bring in Billy Turner, who I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of going in. I went back and studied a lot more tape on him. He is a fun, physical player. He has some lapses from time to time, but you're going from 2 players that graded as huge negatives to a solid to average player that, would probably grade somewhere near neutral. That's where I had him last year when I went back and watched. So this is a fairly big upgrade. Is he going to be a Pro Bowl right guard? Probably not. Is he going to be this player that makes this monster impact throughout the course of a game? Probably not. But is it a massive upgrade from what Green Bay had a season ago? it really is. And Aaron Rodgers has had nothing but really high praise for Billy Turner. And honestly, he's looked like one of the best offensive linemen in all of training camp from what I've been seeing. So I think they filled a huge hole there. And then everything else stays pretty similar. Bakhtiari left tackle, Lane Taylor left guard, although Elton Jenkins, their second-round pick, is really pressing him, and he looks really good as well. Corey Linsley back at center and Brian Bulaga back at right tackle. I think depth, as you guys were kind of mentioning earlier, the depth of the offensive line, you talk to 32 teams, maybe 31 besides the Eagles, because somehow they have depth everywhere. Probably have some depth issues across the offensive line. And Green Bay's probably no different there, but Elton Jenkins as a backup is a pretty darn good interior player. On the flip side, they move on from Mike Daniels. I think that is going to be a big loss, but to some point, he didn't play the second half, most of the second half of last season. So I guess he probably won't be as difficult to replace in that regards. Kenny Clark comes back as a really dominant player on the interior, but it's really the edge rushers. That's a complete and massive turnaround. So they move on from Nick Perry and Clay Matthews and Reggie Gilbert, three players that really struggled the season to go. And I know Nick Perry and Clay Matthews, maybe some bigger names that Bear fans know. Perry has not found a spot on anyone's roster, not even on the 90-man before 53 cut down. So he is not in the league right now. Clay Matthews, of course, took a job with the Rams, but they move on. They get Rashawn Gary in the first round. They get, Preston and Zadarius Smith, who they spent some really big money on. And by all accounts, and certainly my own, Zadarius Smith was the MVP of training camp for the Packers.
Well, I mean, that's good news for Packers fans if your free agent is performing well in the preseason. One name that you mentioned there is 12th overall pick, Rashawn Gary. Some reports saying that he might have had a rough preseason. Can you fill us in what's happening with him and what your expectations are for the young player going into 2019?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to his time at Michigan. The dude is a complete freak athlete, and there's no question around that. And I do not imagine a scenario in any way, shape, or form where he busts to the point where he's not a capable NFL player because his talent is so overwhelmingly abundant. And what I mean by that is he sets an incredible edge. He's very physical, but you can tell that he still doesn't necessarily have a perfect path past an offensive lineman. In camp, he showed up from day one and he was making plays from day one. The truth is, though, a lot of those plays were against some of the second and third string offensive linemen, Jason Spriggs, who they basically released not too long after that, and some of the other backup linemen in camp. He did have a couple of reps here and there that he beat, Brian Bulaga or David Bakhtiari on, but for the most part, he was kind of making his name against some of those second and third stringers. But again, the talent was readily apparent, just like it was at Michigan. Preseason starts. He has some okay games. He has some okay plays, I guess I should say, but really struggled to really register anything, even from like a tackle or a sack. But there were a couple pressures here and there. There were signs that he's putting it together, but he still has a ways to go before he is a complete football player. If you're a Bears fan, you want it to stay that way, and you hope that he never really puts it together and maybe just becomes a solid edge defender, and maybe he gets a sack here and there. From a Green Bay standpoint, if he all of a sudden puts it together, and Mike Smith is the outside linebackers coach who worked with Dee Ford and Chris Jones in Kansas City, Justin Houston, all of them credited Mike Smith incredibly with putting together their pass rush sets. Hopefully that's the case for Green Bay, and Rashawn Gary can do the same thing, but he still has a little ways to go before he's a full-time, all-around performer.
We're talking to Andy Herman of the Pack-A-Day podcast, a very familiar name to Bears fans, Adrian Amos. He joined the team in the offseason. How has he looked in camp, and can you kind of give us an overall view on what the entire defensive backfield looks like for Green Bay?
Yeah, so just kind of like the edge rushers, the three positions last year that the Packers were really terrible at were guard, which, again, we replaced with Billy Turner, edge rusher, which just went through the guys that they replaced with, and then safety. They moved on from Clinton Dix midway through last year, and then they had Kentrell Bryce, who they moved on from, and they bring in, of course, Adrian Amos, and then first-round pick Darnell Savage. So they were aggressive in attacking their biggest areas of need. And I think the Adrian Amos, Clinton Dix thing is so incredibly interesting. And I think the debate has gone on between, Packers Nation and Bears Nation about which one got the better deal, the better value, the better player, and so on and so forth. I think the thing that, Adrian Amos has shown so far, and I think similarly to what he showed in Chicago, is he's incredibly consistent. And I think we can probably probably both agree that at times he's almost allergic to making the big play. He had the big interception against Philadelphia, of course, last year, but just incredibly consistent. Right place, right time, good mentor for Darnell Savage. He's sure tackler. I know he had a couple issues in the Miami game last year where 2 touchdowns were, given up really on missed tackles against Adrian Amos. And that really kind of almost led to them losing the game against Miami. But when I went back and watched his tape last year, those were the exception to the rule. And I think so far in Green Bay, he's shown that same level-headed consistency. But again, I can't recall either in training camp and certainly not in preseason, although he barely got any playing time, a time where, he made any big plays either. So the same Adrian Amos that I think you guys have grown to know, I think is the one that's in Green Bay right now.
Makes sense to me. Let's go back over to the offensive side of the ball. Davante Adams has ascended to the top ranks of NFL wide receivers. But outside of him, what does the rest of the receiving core look like for Green Bay? Because there are some questions about who is the true number 2 guy. Is Allison going to be more in the slot, or is MVS going to be the deep threat guy? Well, can you kind of break down the wide receivers for us?
Yeah, I totally can, and I've studied them, a lot, and I've watched them in camp a lot, and I think you guys probably have as good of an idea as I do on who's going to end up being, the number 2, number 3. I know who's probably going to be in their spots. I think MVS is going to be the outside receiver, playing a lot on the outside and really kind of being that deep threat. And I think Geronimo Allison is really going to be the slot receiver who gets a ton of time in the slot. And then I think you're going to see some plays here and there that Jay Kumaro and Trevor Davis get on the field. But I think the question that remains is who really steps up and takes the reins and really takes over that receiver position, especially opposite Davante Adams. And I think you can even include a guy like Jimmy Graham, maybe even a backup tight end like Robert Tonyan. I just think that they need consistency, and I think they need some playmaking outside of what Davante Adams brings to the team. He's a phenomenal player, and he should, kind of single-handedly open things up for everyone else on the field. I think you have a lot of good players. I don't know that you have a ascending great player at this point, and Green Bay's really waiting for that next player to come up and kind of take the ball and run with it, both figuratively and literally.
We're talking to Andy Herman, owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast. Andy, looks like there's some reports that LaFleur would like to run the ball a little more than Mike McCarthy maybe ever dreamed of. So who are some of the horses that they're going to be leaning on? I know Aaron Jones getting a lot of hype. What do you like out of the running back position in Green Bay?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Aaron Jones is as long as he can stay on the field and take the full brunt of an NFL season, I mean, he's an absolute stud. I mean, he actually, Brian Baldinger, just I want to say about 30 to 45 minutes ago, posted a great breakdown of him on film and how dominant he was, from about week 10 until the Bears game where he got hurt. He is an incredibly gifted running back. He gets through very small holes. He's very slippery. His vision's fantastic. He knows what to do in the open field. He is a consistent playmaker, and he just has to stay on the field and be able to take the full brunt of a 16-game season, and hopefully he's able to do that this year. The names haven't changed. The top 2 are Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. I think Jamal Williams is still your steady guy. He hasn't had a lot of big plays, kind of like maybe an Adrian Amos of the offense to an extent. Very consistent, very good blocker. He can catch out of the backfield, but nothing really dynamic about him. And then Dexter Williams is their 3rd running back. Not ready to play yet, to be totally honest. He's a developmental guy. Man, when he is on, he looks fantastic. And when he is off, he looks awful. So he still has a ways to go before he gets that consistency, but the flashes are impressive.
We talked about a lot of the changes that the Packers made in the offseason addressing weaknesses, and it seems to be a little bit of a culture shift in the Green Bay front office as far as free agency not being something that they're shying away from anymore. What's the prevailing feeling on Brian Gutekunst now that he's had 2 offseasons under his belt?
Yeah, and I think the big thing there is he kind of had to do it out of necessity. There are a couple recent draft classes where there's basically nobody left from those draft classes. So, he's had to kind of add some players onto the team based out of necessity. Like I said, last year, guard, edge, and safety were really the cupboard was completely bare. I mean, they had nobody that was readily available to play right guard last year. They had really nobody that was up to the par at edge. I mean, Kyler Fackrell had a okay game okay season as a rotational rusher, but it was nowhere near being a full-time player. And then same thing at safety. So they go out, they get Adrian Amos, they go out, they get Billy Turner, they get Preston and Zadarius Smith. I think he's doing the things that are necessary to make this team, a viable contender, while Aaron Rodgers is still, I don't want to say the prime of his career, but he's, still close to it. And I think he's doing all the right things, whether that turns out or not, and whether he can turn that into a Super Bowl contender, either, this year or the next couple of years will remain to be seen. I think there's still some significant holes, but I at least hope that he's on the right path. It kind of seems that way, at least.
Before I turn it over to Aldo to see what the chat room has for you, Andrew, I want to ask about your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers. He's had some injury issues in the past couple years, some unkind things reported about his leadership skills. He's now 35 years old. In your opinion, what you're seeing, is this a guy that's capable of playing at the peak level we've seen him in the past, or are we going to see gradual decline? Sometimes we see guys fall off a cliff, and sometimes it's a gradual decline. Or do you think that he can play at an MVP level this year?
I think that's one of the super cool aspects going into this season is the quarterback position for the longest time in Green Bay hasn't even been remotely a question mark. And it's still not. You still have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And even if it's the exact same Aaron Rodgers from last year, that's still well above league average. And you still have a very good quarterback. But if you have prime Aaron Rodgers, if you have really good Aaron Rodgers, that's simply basically a ticket to the playoffs in and of itself. And last year, we didn't see that. And obviously, they didn't make the playoffs last year. And I think the question remains, was it based off of injury last year? Was it based off of scheme, system, and kind of the staleness of either his relationship with Mike McCarthy or just the offense in general? Or was it legitimately that we saw the first signs of decline? Again, if Aaron Rodgers is the same Aaron Rodgers from last year, you can still win with that. You have to put good players around him. Devontae Adams is phenomenal. David Bakhtiari, a true shutdown left tackle. You've got a much better defense this year. You could still win games. But if he's prime Aaron Rodgers, then, the rest of the league immediately goes on notice. So I think we're going to know a lot more after Thursday, and certainly as the season goes on. And the hope in Green Bay is that him and Matt LaFleur can come up with something perfect and get him back on track. That's why they hired a new head coach. That's why they hired an offensive coach. And that's why they hired a coach that's known for working very well with quarterbacks. It's to get Aaron Rodgers back to prime Aaron Rodgers, because that's what they know they need him to be.
We're talking to Andy Herman of the Pack-A-Day podcast. Aldo, I know you've been interacting with our Mixler.com chat room. Any questions for Andy from our friends?
Yeah, I've got, 3 or 4 here. Let me begin with Heart4803 asked a question about the other inside linebacker. We all know Blake Martinez is a really good run stopper at that inside linebacker and pretty good in coverage too. But the other inside linebacker, Oren Burks, is hurt and probably not going to play. So what's the deal? Is this new guy that they acquired, BJ Goodson, in a trade for a 7th-round draft pick, is he's going to be available to play? What's your overall feeling on the inside linebacker position?
Great question. So BJ Goodson, from at least what Mike Pettin said, no, Mike Pettin easily could be lying, but he basically said that it would be unlikely that anyone that got to practice today for the first time would be available to play on defense for the game on Thursday. I think there's an outside chance that maybe he's ready to go from a special team standpoint. He played 40% of the special team snaps last year. So I think that's something that we could potentially see out of BJ Goodson. But really, the only lone linebacker that's left besides Blake Martinez is Ty Summers, a 7th-round draft pick who has flashed incredibly all over the field, but has missed, I want to say, at minimum double-digit tackles. Missed some serious tackles. And if David Montgomery gets in the open field with Ty Summers, he's probably going to be licking his chops a little bit. But he has been all over the place, sideline to sideline speed. He's a freak athlete. And if he can wrap up and get players to the ground, Green Bay has something there. But he's been very inconsistent. I think you're going to see a lot of safety Raven Green, who's kind of that hybrid safety linebacker. My guess is you're going to see a ton of him in that inside linebacker role playing next to Blake Martinez on Thursday.
Steven Zimmerman is asking about a tight end that we were really high on here, our draft analysts at Bears Barroom, Jay Sternberger. He's been placed on the injured reserve list, and what kind of an impact is that on the tight end position for the Packers? And knowing that, Jimmy Graham is not really the player he was definitely when he was with New Orleans.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham didn't have a phenomenal season last year. I think part of the issue is they're asking him to be, they were asking him to be more of an inline blocker, which he's simply not at this point in his career. I'm going to be interested to see how they use him in Green Bay this year. But Sternberger had an interesting offseason. He kind of had a little bit of an injury going in and was a little bit delayed. He finally gets into camp. Was starting to make a little bit of an impression, and then he gets knocked out in the inter-squad scrimmages by Lonnie Johnson of the Texans, has a concussion for a couple weeks, finally comes back, gets in the 4th preseason game, looks good, catches a touchdown, and then I think he was either on the touchdown catch or another catch, hurts his ankle. They think he's going to be able to come back. He ends up in a walking boot, and again today got placed on IR. So Robert Tonyan's the name to keep an eye on. Ton of potential. Trained with George Kittle in the offseason. Former wide receiver. Started with the Lions. Didn't really make it there. Kind of caught on with Green Bay. Had a like a 60-yard touchdown against the Seahawks last year. Was an impressive play, but didn't do much else. He's looking to make that jump in Green Bay, and I think he's going to get some significant playing time. We'll see what he kind of makes of it.
Okay, Viggy Valenti, and I'm not making these names up, by the way. These are great names. Viggy Valenti wants to know how serious are the injuries to Kevin King and Williams?
Yeah, Tramon Williams, we don't know yet. He just got put on the injury report for the first time today. He was listed as a limited participant. I haven't heard anything that would indicate that he's not going to play. My guess is that he's fine and probably going to play on Thursday. But we'll again, something that's worth monitoring at minimum. And then for Kevin King, he came back this week. He's kind of been a full go in practice, but they did say he's going to be limited. My guess is he splits snaps either with Tony Brown or Josh Jackson, but I would guess he plays maybe 20, 30 snaps against Chicago, probably at most in a limited capacity while he works his way back from injury.
Last question. We were talking about Mason Crosby and Sam Ficken, that whole battle. I always kind of thought that Ficken was really just there for show. I didn't really ever consider him a serious threat to Mason Crosby. So if you can share some perspective on that, and also just give us your overall perspective on the Packers special teams. I have not been, I don't know how John feels about this, but I haven't been particularly impressed with the return units for the Chicago Bears in preseason, and so I'm interested in knowing what the Packers are doing with their punt and kickoff return teams.
Yeah, well, first of all, Cordero Patterson has always given Green Bay problems. So, just get him the ball in some capacity on special teams, and you guys should be fine regardless of what else is going on. He's kind of been a little bit of a Packers killer in that regards. But, from a special team standpoint, I think when it gets down to Crosby and Ficken, I think they would have loved for Sam Ficken to come in and, kick the leather off the ball and completely be a phenomenal kicker and move forward with him. If you look at Crosby, he struggled a little bit a season ago, especially with clutch kicks. He's 35 years old. They could have saved $3 million by moving to a younger kicker. If they get a younger kicker they can trust, I think they would have loved to sign him to a longer-term deal and kind of keep him in tow for a while. But Ficken just never showed that he had the ability to be that type of player. And my guess is they'll try the same thing going into next year as well. But Crosby won it pretty handily, and I don't think it was ever really in doubt at the end. And it even is more telling that with all the kicker needs across the league, including potentially in Chicago, nobody claims Sam Ficken. So I think that probably tells you all you need to know. But yeah, I think from a special team standpoint, J.K. Scott, the punter, second-year player, has had a fantastic training camp in preseason. So hopefully he can kick the cover off the ball and really make a huge impact from a punt team. I wouldn't really worry about any of Green Bay's returners. I don't think there's anything really too special there. Green Bay doesn't really, draft or develop or sign players for returnability. They get it for offense and defense, and if they can return, it's kind of a bonus. And then, like I said, from a kicking standpoint, Crosby's Crosby, and I think you kind of know what you get there. I have one question for you guys, though. This is my question for you.
All right.
2 seconds left, down by 2, 43-yard field goal to win the game. Are the Bears going to make the kick to win the game at Soldier Field, down to 2 seconds left?
Well, wouldn't that be poetic justice? I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I think as people who've covered the Bears and paid attention to the Bears our entire lives, we're just a little gun shy about this kind of stuff because until there's actual consistency there, you're going to hold your breath and you're going to be really, really terrified until you see it actually go through the upright. So I wish I could give you an answer. I really wish I could. I can't.
I can say this. I think as Bears and Packers fans, I don't think any of us really want it to come down to that. But man, as an NFL fan, that's about the dream scenario if you're an NFL fan.
Oh, I agree because misery loves company, but people also take a lot of people love to see other fans just die off of a missed field goal. So we know that, firsthand. All right. Aldo, I think that takes care of the chat room. Andy, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us here on Buffone 55. Please tell our audience where they can find your work and find you on social media.
Yeah, you can follow me on social media and on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find my work as a Bears fan, I guess, if you want, on Cheesehead TV. And you can also find me on Pro Football Network. You can find us there at PFN 365. And I do a weekly podcast with Tony Pauline breaking down the NFL draft. So you can find me there as well.
Excellent. Andy Herman of the Pack a Day podcast. Andy, thank you so much for being on. We'll talk to you down the road.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, take care.
Well,
Love
John,
that music.
Yeah, I love it too. In fact, I was working on a project today, and I was listening to nothing but NFL music throughout the day. So, to be honest with you, I'm kind of sick of it right now.
Oh, well, yeah, if you listen to it for 4 straight hours.
That was about correct, about 4 straight hours. But nonetheless, that music signifies that we're into the second half of our B55 questions. And actually, John, I've got more than 5 questions for you. Let's take this all the way down to the limit. What do you think?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. Now, given the lack of play against other teams for Bears starters, is rust the biggest concern the Bears face Thursday night, or is it Aaron Rodgers, the longtime nemesis of the Bears? Rust or Rodgers? What say you? You've got 55 seconds.
It'll always be Rodgers. I mean, last year we did see Khalil Mack have to shake off some rust, but that's because they signed him like 5 days before the season. So I know some people feel like the starters need a good amount of reps in the preseason, but let's not pretend that they aren't going over game situations every single day. It's not like they're sitting there crushing Cheetos and watching Breaking Bad in the locker room. I mean, but as long as he's in a Packers uniform, Aaron Rodgers will always be the biggest threat. The Bears had the Packers dead to rights last year in the opener, and obviously the season turned out okay, but I would say, man, that first one hurt. And I tend to dwell on losses because I love playing the what-if game. If the Bears beat the Packers in that game, they end up 13-3. They end up being the number 2 seed in the playoffs, and then, well, let's not get too carried away. But the Bears did exercise some demons last year by beating Green Bay later in the season. But, man, this game really feels important. The Bears are getting called a flash-in-the-pan phenomenon. They need to win this game to really set the tone for the rest of the year. If Rodgers thrives with this new coach, it's a bad look. It sets the wrong tone for the season. It's a bigger game than what people think.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. This is really a huge game. And by the way, we've got a Instagram account now, Bears Ballroom Radio Network, and I did my own 55 seconds there. I talked a little bit about the whole rust thing, and so I'm going to try to post as many videos as often, maybe even one a day, to kind of get our own little Bears Ballroom Network on Instagram. So head on over to Bears Ballroom Radio Network on Instagram if you are on that social media channel, and check out what we've got in store for you there. Now, let's move over to question number 2. Andy talked about the Packers' offensive and defensive lines. How do you think the battle in the trenches will fare for the Bears? Let's start with the offense, where, by the way, Cody Whitehair just signed a contract extension that will keep him with the Bears for several years. That's great news. Talk to me about the offensive line. The clock begins now.
Well, the revamped Green Bay line does have some promise. They're incredibly young, and it's hard to tell which way it's going to play out, the Clark, Adams, and Lowry. But I'm comfortable with the Bears line with Leno Whitehair, which was a fantastic extension, by the way. Daniels coming along at center, and then Long and Massey holding down the right side. This is a very solid unit that you really, really hope can stay healthy. I will say this. I know it was against a different-looking Packers D-line last year, but the Bears didn't exactly light up the box score in the run game in their meetings against Green Bay. Jordan Howard got the lion's share of the carries, 15 in the first matchup, 19 in the second, with 80 yards and 60 yards respectively. But I would absolutely love, to see the Bears show off their new toy in David Montgomery, pound the ball down the field, drain the clock, keep Aaron Rodgers off the field, and steal the Packers' soul with demoralizing drives. That's what I want to see. Punch them in the mouth, set the tone, but you're going to need the road graders for that. Let's hope they can do it.
I love the way you think. Okay, now, question number 3. Let's talk about the defensive line. Last season, in week 1, the Bears annihilated the Packers' offensive line, as Handy said, in the first half. And then the Packers, they made some adjustments that allowed Rodgers more protection after he came back from the injury. Oh, what a terrible memory that was. Anyway, in the home game, the Bears molested Rodgers throughout the game and came up with 5 sacks and held him to 0 touchdowns and 1 interception, a beautiful interception by Eddie Jackson, who, by the way, got hurt on the play, but that's another story. Anyway, with the Packers adapting this quick passing offensive scheme, is it even likely to expect the defensive line to make much of an impact on Aaron Rodgers? Your 55 seconds begins now.
Well, we did see the Bears defense look a little vulnerable against quick passes last year. I'm going to reference the Miami game with Albert Wilson. Albert freaking Wilson had 6 catches for 155 yards and 2 touchdowns. The defense just didn't adjust well to it. I'll be interested to see how Pagano responds. I know he likes to throw a lot of deceptions at offenses pre-snap, fake the overload blitzes only to get protection shifted the wrong way. Obviously, Rodgers is going to recognize some of that, but I think the Bears line has a better than average chance to really eat on Thursday. Mack, he's in shape. He's healthy. This is probably one of the few times that Leonard Floyd might be 100% healthy. Let's hope that's not the case. But I know I'm talking about the edge rushers a lot, but I certainly don't want to sleep on Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, and Bilal Nichols. This is a scary, scary defense, and they can wreak havoc on any team, not just the Packers. They can wreak havoc on any team. This is why they're the best. They're the best for a reason, because they can eat up anybody. I am intrigued to see how they react and adapt under Pagano, though, because they did things a little differently under Fangio, I'm guessing.
Yep, indeed. Question number 4. Mitch Trubisky threw for 171 yards in the opener last year with 0 touchdowns and was sacked 4 times. In Week 15 against the Packers, he tosses 2 touchdowns, 235 yards, and is sacked only once. Which Mitch are we going to see on Thursday, and why? 55 seconds.
I think we're far more likely to see the better Mitch. I don't think he needs 350 yards and 3 touchdowns to win the game. But, last year in the opener, it was his first game in Nagy's system. It was a hostile environment, a ton of pressure. I know he's probably better prepared mentally and physically going into this year. He's not so much in the learning process anymore. He's in the execution process. I don't think moments are going to be too big for him anymore. I think he's embracing the leadership role, and he has to take a step forward this year. I hit on this briefly last week, but this is the year that it's okay to hold Trubisky to a higher standard. He was good last year. He got the job done. Now is when we start to see what the staff believes he can be. Unfairly or not, Mitch still gets a lot of heat. And if he goes and balls out, people just can't fall back on, well, their quarterback sucks whenever they're analyzing the Bears. This is a pivotal year for Mitch Trubisky. In football, you can't stand still. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. And I believe he has the tools to be the guy. Now is when we have to see it. And getting back to the original question, I think this game will be a launching point for that.
Awesome. All right, we're going to get a little off our planned question here, and I want to ask you a personal question and then go to the chat room. We got a few people here who've got questions for you, and then we'll get to the final question. But I wanted to ask you about...
That's a great question.
You like that? Are you sick of this music like I am? General Manager Ryan Pace, he says that Trey Burton is day-to-day with a mild groin injury, and, so he may play Thursday. In fact, I saw some video of him running around. He didn't look bad. But, unfortunately, on social media, there's a whole portion of Bears fans who immediately attribute the injury to Burton's mental health issues. And, he's talked about this publicly, Trey Burton has. He's talked about his anxiety disorder. And so I want to turn off the clock here and just ask you, for what your take is about what is a very complicated and a personal situation for Trey Burton.
Look, if a guy's hurt, he's hurt. Now, fans are allowed to be frustrated by players' injuries, and they can be frustrated at the frequency of injuries. But if you're in the NFL, I'm pretty sure you're strong mentally and physically. What it takes just to get to that point is, more than what the average person possesses, I'm guessing. Secondly, I have no idea if Burton's anxiety is playing into this at all. I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm not going to pretend like I know what's going on. I want to make that crystal clear. Because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This is how the whole concussion thing got started. Pretending that if you can't see it, it's not real, and then you just go out there and play. We've come a long way in identifying and understanding mental illnesses, and I get that football fans can be emotional and sometimes expect things from athletes that they would never expect from themselves. That's not right, but that's how it is. I think we need to understand that a serious mental ailment can hinder you just as much as a physical ailment. Once again, I'm not going to act like I know anything about what's going on with Trey Burton. I'm simply responding to this question about, fans' reaction. We're talking about humans, and humans have normal human problems. I don't care if you make $100 million or $10,000. Some things you just can't escape. And I get it. Like I said, I understand fans' frustration when a guy can't play, but I'm not plugged into the situation. A lot of us aren't plugged into the situation. For me, I feel it'd be wrong for me to criticize somebody that might be dealing with something I know nothing about. I know that that's not exactly an inflammatory take, and that's not going to make a great soundbite, but I do my best not to talk out of my ass, and I fail miserably on a daily basis, but I'm going to try harder on this one. I just feel like it's not my position to criticize someone that I don't know anything about.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Hair Bear in the chat room says it's a great answer, and I got to tell you, I've had issues with anxiety myself, and I've been open about it. But at the same time, sometimes you almost regret being open about it because then people start speculating. Oh, well, did he not show up to this party because he's having an anxiety issue and so forth like that? And I see that happening to Trey Burton now. Everything that happens to him, immediately, people start talking about this mental health issue, and I don't think we should do that. The guy was brave enough to bring it to the open, in the opens to help people, and now it's being used against him whenever he faces a physical injury. And he has stated in an interview on the Score Sports Radio, he said that the injury in the playoffs last year had nothing to do with his anxiety disorder, and so I wish people would just take him at his word and just deal with this injury for what it probably is. An injury, and leave it at that. It's a kind of a personal issue for me, and I wanted to get your take on it too, because I know you've talked openly about mental health issues and so forth. You were on with Trey Busy on his show, Let's Talk It Out podcast, and so thank you for sharing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we still got a long way to go across the board. That goes beyond sports.
Indeed. Okay. Harp 4803 in the chat room wants to get your thoughts on the depth at the offensive line position. It's an area of concern for him. Share your thoughts on the offensive line.
It is an area of concern because, like I said, I like the offensive line. There's not a whole lot of depth behind there, and we've seen guys on this line get banged up before. Is Kyle Long going to go the whole year? We don't know. Hopefully Whitehair can go the whole year. I mean, when you're playing on the offensive line, injuries are going to happen. To get through scot-free is almost, is a big rarity. So I am concerned about that. I think that's why you might see bars get brought up at some point, but it's a little bit of a concern for me. I like the starters, not a whole lot of depth, but yeah, I guess you could make that case for a lot of teams across the board.
Indeed. Another question here regarding Leonard Floyd and whether he's going to make an impact this season. I've seen predictions of anywhere between 5 sacks this year and 10. What are your thoughts about Leonard Floyd?
I'm all over the place on Leonard Floyd. I was so high on him for a while, and then you see you get, whether it's an injury or kind of disappearing on plays. I'm actually really excited to see how Pagano's going to use him, because if it is more of an aggressive play calling, maybe he's going to try to find what Floyd's strengths are. But it all comes down to whether or not he's on the field. And I know, and there's a slew of injuries, and I'm not going to hold that against him. It's just that if he's not on the field, it's hard to say that it's a productive player. So I think that he has the potential to have a really great season, and he needs to, because eventually he's going to want to get paid. And whether that's with Chicago or not, that's yet to be determined. But he has the potential there. But man, it's going to be a rocky road.
That last question was from Mr. Valenti, and I'm not even going to pronounce his first name because I screwed it up the first time, and I don't want to try to do that again.
You've learned your lesson.
That's right. JD Bears at a 10 says that he would love to see Adam Shaheen be the player we believe he should be. I love the way that he phrased that. Who do you believe Adam Shaheen should be?
Well, not what I thought he was going to be, because, when this guy was drafted, out of a small college, and they're like, well, they call him Baby Gronk because he's a former basketball player, super tall, athletic, steamrolling guys, taking linebackers in coverage, no one can guard him. And he is like Gronk in the sense that he's big and he's suffering a lot of different back injuries and a lot of different injuries that are going to keep him from the field. And obviously, Gronk had a much better career and was able to, get a lot of productivity. But, that's a big body that's, constantly either, blocking linemen or going up and getting hit in the middle. And a lot of the times back injuries and, these lingering injuries just don't go away. They don't just all of a sudden heal and you're healthy for 2, 3, 4 years. So, unfortunately, I think this is who Adam Shaheen is, a guy that is potentially a pretty good red zone threat whenever he's on the field, but I don't know if you can ever expect him to be a constant in the lineup.
Yeah, it's a bit troublesome. But I'm going to be the optimistic Bear fan and say he's going to have a breakout year. He's going to give us 55 catches, 7 touchdowns. He's going to make a big play in a game and win the game for us. So I'm going to look at that.
Let's hope.
All right. Let's get to our final question. Last year, John, we had such great success with your final question in the back half of the 55. It was basically I asked you to do a pep talk, and I would pick somebody. So I thought that this year what we would do is that we would pick out a particular player for you to give a pep talk to. We've got 17 of these shows or 16 of these shows, whatever amount, and then every week we'll pick a different player for you to do a pep talk to, and then we'll post it up on Twitter and we'll send it to the Bears player, and hopefully he hears it. So this is your way of communicating directly to the player. So the first player that I've picked out for you is none other than Eddie Pinheiro. The clock is off. Take it away.
Eddie, buddy, how you doing? Take a seat. Well, you finally get your shot at being an NFL kicker. Unfortunately, you're stepping into probably the most pressurized kicking situation in the entire league. Unfairly, you're going to be criticized more harshly because of other kickers' mistakes. After all, you're following in the footsteps of the likes of Connor Barth, Roberto Aguayo, Cairo Santos, Mike Nugent, and that was just 2017. Then, of course, our old buddy Cody Parkey, the Duke of Doinks. You've walked into a position that is already a punchline, almost toxic. But that's why you're here, to change that. You have a chance to put your name into Bears history. And I'm not just blowing smoke here. It's true. You're 23 years old. You could literally kick for another 20 years. If you seize this opportunity, you can lay the groundwork to be a mainstay and to turn a position of doubt and tragic comedy into a reliable force. Don't see this as a hurdle to overcome, but see it as an opportunity of a lifetime. The Bears are going to need you this year, Eddie, and Bears fans want to love you. Stay focused, aim true, and under no circumstances, no matter what happens, never ever go on the freaking Today Show to talk about anything. And this is the point of the show where I give you my prediction for the game. So here is my forecast. I think the Bears come out strong, and unlike last year, they're not going to fade. Look for the defense to take advantage of some early Green Bay miscues and expect a couple splash plays on offense. I think the Bears start the season 1-0 with a 23-19 win over Green Bay. I want to thank Andy Herman for being on the show. Send him a tweet at Andy Herman NFL and tell him you appreciated his participation on tonight's show. As for me, you can follow me on Twitter at JD Buffone. Make sure you're following the Barroom on Twitter at Bears Barroom and on the Facebook page. Aldo, thanks for filling in. You got anything?
Yes. I want to tell everybody that following this show on Mixlr.com, that's our live Bears Barroom channel, we've got Fantasy Football Goon coming up. Joe Mandel is at the reins, Joey Two Scoops, and then his co-host on that show is always Johnny Santucci, also known as the Tooch, and Spaceball, the legendary Spaceball from the Score Sports Radio. He's actually started the very first fantasy football show on radio that's documented anyway, and so he is a guest every week on that show, Fantasy Football Goon. That starts at 8 p.m. Central, and then after that show, it's Shy Fans in the Stands with the great Greg Braggs Jr. and Joey Two Scoops, and their guest tonight is Jim Cornelius, and the famous singer who does national anthems at the United Center for Blackhawk games and at Bears games, and so that's going to be a treat. Those two shows, along with this one, will be available in podcast format, so make sure you subscribe to Bears Barroom Radio Network. You can find it on iTunes, Podbean, you name it. John, it's all yours.
That's right, and sign up on Mixler.com for email updates on all of our live shows. We'd love to have you in the chat room. Make sure you drop us a review. That helps us out immensely. It's all absolutely free to sign up, so let's take this ride together. But that'll do it for us. This has been Buffone 55 on the Bears Barroom Radio Network. Football, it's coming. Get hyped. We'll see you next time.